He was a billionaire who had never been helpless a day in his life. But on the night his luxury SUV died in the middle of a violent storm outside Abuja, and a poor female mechanic climbed down from a rusty pickup truck to help him in his distress, that was the night everything changed. And how this billionaire fell in love with the poor female mechanic who helped him in distress is exactly what will shock everyone. He was the king of glass towers and land deals, the kind of billionaire people only saw on TV. But she was a grease-stained roadside mechanic who fixed broken engines for cash that barely kept the lights on. He had boardrooms, drivers, and bodyguards, but she had a single battered toolbox, a tired smile, and a heart that refused to stop helping people. When the rain poured harder, when his phone lost signal, when fear tightened in his chest and her small pickup truck cut through the darkness like a miracle, he didn't know that the poor female mechanic bending over his engine was quietly rewriting everything he believed about love, worth, and destiny. Why did a billionaire who could have anyone become obsessed with the poor female mechanic who helped him in distress that night? What really happened after she towed him away from danger? And when their worlds finally collided for real, who tried to tear them apart, and who was shocked in the end? The highway out of Abuja looked nothing like the glossy real estate brochures Landon Price was used to signing. By day, the road to the undeveloped outskirts was dusty and stubborn, stretching between scrubland and half-formed communities. By night, under a gathering storm, it felt like the edge of the world. Landon checked his watch again as the SUV's headlights glared into the dark. Lightning split the sky somewhere ahead, illuminating the endless ribbon of road. The wipers slapped frantically over the windshield, barely pushing aside the rain. "Sir, maybe we should have waited till morning," his driver, Jonah, said quietly, both hands gripping the wheel. "We don't move multi-billion naira land deals to morning because of a little rain," Landon replied, though his voice lacked its usual easy arrogance. "The chiefs want to sign tonight. We sign tonight." He leaned back, fingers drumming on his knee, trying to believe his own words. He hated this stretch of road. No streetlights, no proper emergency services, patches where his phone dropped from full bars to nothing. His father had called him reckless when he mentioned driving out, then corrected himself and called it necessary risk. Kings of buildings didn't get scared of bad roads, he'd said. Kings of buildings showed up. Another crack of thunder shook the glass. The SUV hit a puddle so deep it lifted slightly, then slammed back to the ground. The engine coughed in protest. Landon glanced at the dashboard. The temperature gauge was rising, a bright red line creeping toward danger. "Is that normal?" he asked. Jonah's jaw tightened. "No, sir. I'll slow down." The heat climbed anyway. A warning light flashed. The engine made a choking sound that Landon had never heard in any of his cars. His chest tightened. "Pull over," he ordered. Jonah coaxed the car to the side of the deserted road. When the SUV stopped, the sudden quiet was almost worse than the engine's struggle. Rain battered the roof in sheets. Wind screamed around them. Landon picked up his phone. No signal. Of course. He stared at the blank bars in disbelief, like money should have guaranteed reception even in the middle of nowhere. "Try yours," he said. Jonah already had. "Nothing, sir. This area is always bad." Landon cursed under his breath. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't surrounded by glass walls, security teams, and backup plans. It was just him, his driver, and a storm that didn't care who he was. "Maybe let the engine cool. We go again," Jonah said, but his tone wasn't convinced. Landon looked out at the inky black road. No passing cars, no buildings, just rain and darkness and the uncomfortable sensation that his life, for once, wasn't in his control. "Pop the hood," he said finally. "Let's at least see what we're dealing with." They stepped out into the storm. Instantly, rain soaked his tailored suit, flattening his hair, turning the world into a blur of cold and noise. Jonah wrestled the hood open, and a cloud of hot steam hissed upward, ghostly in the headlight beams. Radiators boiling. Jonah yelled over the storm. Something's wrong with the cooling system. Maybe the fan. Can you fix it? Landon shouted back, though he already knew the answer. Jonah was a solid driver, not a mechanic. He shook his head, frustration on his face. Not here. Not now. We need a mechanic or a tow. Landon looked down the road again. Still nothing. Water ran in rivers through the dirt beside the asphalt, creating small, muddy streams. The sky grumbled with another distant roar. For the first time that night, a small thread of fear slid through him. This is how accidents happen. His father's voice nagged in his memory. Men who think they're invincible meeting a road that reminds them they're not. He slammed the hood down, water splashing his shoes. We'll flag someone down, he said. There has to be another car passing soon. Minutes ticked by, stretched out by the drumming rain. No headlights appeared. His once expensive suit clung to his skin, heavy and useless. The storm had turned the powerful Landon Price into just another stranded man in the dark. Sir, Jonah said quietly. If nobody comes, we might have to sleep in the car till morning. Landon pressed a hand over his face. The idea of sleeping upright in an SUV on a deserted road, with no security and no plan, made him feel like the world's richest fool. He thought of the land deal, waiting chiefs, elders, lawyers. He thought of the way people looked at him in Abuja, like he was untouchable. Here, none of that mattered. Then, faintly at first, a pair of headlights appeared behind them, cutting through the rain. Finally, Landon muttered, relief mixing with caution. Stand by the car, wave them down. The vehicle drew closer, its engine sounding smaller, less polished. As it neared, he saw it was an old pickup truck, the kind used to haul cement bags and spare parts, not VIPs. The truck slowed, then came to a stop a few meters ahead of them, hazard lights blinking orange in the wet night. The driver's door opened with a creak. To Landon's surprise, a slim woman in a soaked gray jumpsuit hopped down. Raindrops clung to her lashes as she squinted through the downpour at them. You guys okay? She called out, raising her voice over the storm. Her accent was local, her tone brisk, like this was just another ordinary inconvenience. Our engine overheated, Landon shouted back. No signal. We're headed to a meeting. It sounded ridiculous even as he said it. She jogged closer, boots splashing through muddy water, a small flashlight in her hand. Her braided hair was pulled back under a faded baseball cap. Oil stains darkened the sleeves of her jumpsuit. Pop the hood, she said without introduction, nodding toward the SUV like she'd seen 100 of them broken down before. Landon blinked at her directness. You're a mechanic? She gave a short, almost amused huff. I don't wear this for fashion. She motioned again. Let's see what we're dealing with, before the rain drowns us all. Jonah did as she asked. Steam billowed out again, and she leaned in without flinching, the flashlight beam dancing over engine parts. Her fingers moved quickly, checking this, touching that, like she could read the story the engine was telling. Your cooling fan's not doing its job, she shouted over the thunder. Rain and speed probably made the problem worse. Radiators flooded and overheating. You keep forcing it. You blow the engine completely. Can you fix it? Landon asked. Hope and impatience tangled in his chest. Not here, she said, straightening. I need tools and a replacement part. My workshop's about 20 minutes from here. She glanced up and down the empty road, then at the raging sky. Her eyes narrowed in thought. Listen, there's no hotel out here, and this storm won't calm anytime soon. I can tow your SUV to my place. You and your driver can sleep there for the night. I fix it properly in the morning. Then you go. Landon stared at her. Stay at her place? A stranger's home? Every instinct conditioned by years of wealth and caution screamed no. He didn't know her name, her background, nothing. As if reading his hesitation, she added, "Or you can sleep in your car and hope nobody dangerous drives by." "Your choice," thunder answered for him. A violent crack that made him flinch. He looked at the empty road, then back at her small, stubborn frame standing firm in the rain. She looked like someone who had weathered worse storms than this. "What's your name?" he asked, water dripping from his lashes. "Kira," she replied. "Kira Morgan. I'm the only mechanic with a functioning tow truck within 30 kilometers. Decide fast. Billionaire or not, the rain doesn't care." The word billionaire on her tongue made him blink. She'd recognized him even drenched in the dark. Something about that grounded him. She wasn't impressed, just informed. "I'm Landon Price," he said, out of habit. "I know," she said simply. "You can introduce yourself properly later. Let's hook your car before the road starts to flood." In that instant, standing between a dead SUV and a rusty tow truck in the middle of nowhere, Landon made one of the strangest decisions of his life. He nodded. "All right, Kira, we'll come with you." A small, satisfied smile flickered across her face, there and gone again. "Good. Help Jonah steer while I hook up the tow. And try not to step in the deeper puddles, you'll lose those city shoes." For the first time that night, despite the storm and the fear, a reluctant, disbelieving laugh escaped Landon's throat as he moved to help, guided by the poor female mechanic who had appeared in his distress like an answer to an unspoken prayer. He had no idea that this soaked, stubborn woman and her offer of shelter were about to rearrange everything he thought he knew about home, safety, and love. He just knew one thing. He had never felt more out of his depth, or more strangely, curious. They worked in the rain, muscles straining, hands slipping over wet metal, until the SUV was secured. When Kira finally climbed back into her pickup and motioned them to follow in the cab, Landon hesitated only a second before sliding into the passenger seat, water dripping onto the worn upholstery. As the old truck pulled his broken SUV away from the lonely road and into the storm-blurred night, Landon stared sideways at the poor female mechanic driving with calm focus, and a quiet, unsettling thought whispered through him. "This night will not leave you the same." The storm chased them all the way. Kira's pickup truck growled against the wind, wipers sweeping back and forth with tired determination. Through the smeared windshield, Landon saw only broken silhouettes of trees, scattered roadside huts, and long blankets of darkness between them. His luxury SUV followed behind on the tow bar, its headlights bouncing weakly in the mirrors like a defeated animal being led home. Inside the cab, it was quiet. Jonah sat in the back seat, trying not to drip too much water on the faded upholstery. Landon sat stiffly in the front, his expensive suit clinging cold to his skin, the air smelling of rain, metal, and a faint hint of engine oil that seemed soaked into everything around her. Kira drove with both hands steady on the wheel, eyes narrowed, face lit in pulses by oncoming lightning. Every few moments, her jaw clenched when the truck skidded slightly through deep water. But she never panicked, never cursed, never snapped. She just adjusted, corrected, moved forward, like she had done this 1,000 times and the storm was just another thing to work around. "You do this a lot?" Landon asked finally, his voice low in the hum of the engine. "Rescue rich guys who thought this road was a good idea at night," she replied, one eyebrow lifting. "More than you'd think." He almost smiled. "I didn't exactly have a choice. The elders always have a choice." She cut in gently. "You're breathing. You have a choice." The way she said it made something twist inside him. For her, maybe choices never felt wide. He watched her hands on the wheel, calloused knuckles, a faint scar across one finger. These were not the hands of someone who'd been protected all her life. These were working hands, tired hands, steady hands. A cluster of dim lights appeared ahead, scattered along a side road. Kira slowed and turned off the main highway onto a rough, narrower street lined with low buildings and patchy fences. Stray dogs darted out of the way. A few people huddled under shop canopies, watching the passing truck and its expensive cargo with tired curiosity. "This is Mo," she said. Not much to look at in the rain. The name felt small, ordinary, but it lodged in his mind. Mo. A place he would never have come on his own. A place that would never appear in his glossy investment proposals. They wound through the town until they pulled into a gravel yard closed off by a metal gate. On one side, Landon saw a simple concrete building with a sliding door, the workshop, judging by the scattered tires and hanging tools. On the other side, a single-story house sat under the steady drumming of the rain, its windows glowing faintly yellow through thin curtains. Kira honked twice. The gate creaked open from the inside, pushed by an older woman in a wrapper and faded t-shirt, her gray-streaked braids tucked into a scarf. She held the gate with practiced strength, eyes widening when she saw the SUV being towed. Kira," she called over the noise. "Another one in this rain?" Kira leaned out and shouted back, "Radiator fan issue. Mom, we'll talk inside, it's crazy out here." "Mom." The word landed with a soft thud in Landon's chest. They pulled fully into the yard. The older woman shut the gate, then came closer, eyes quickly taking in Landon's soaked suit, Jonah's quiet presence, the expensive SUV. "Good evening, ma'am," Landon said automatically, because something about her felt like the type of person you greeted properly. She looked him up and down, with no sign of being impressed. "Evening, my son. You people must be cold. Come inside before you catch something. You can deal with car story tomorrow." That simple, no-nonsense concern disarmed him more than any polished welcome he'd received in five-star hotels. Kira unhooked the tow with swift movements, securing the SUV near the workshop, then jogged toward the house, motioning for them to follow. "Let the car rest, you two. Power might go off if the storm continues, so we'll eat before that." Inside, the house was small but warm. The sitting room held a worn brown couch, a low table, a side shelf with framed photos. Kira as a teenager holding a wrench, the older woman laughing with a younger man near a half-finished car, a little boy grinning with missing front teeth, hugging a toy truck. A ceiling fan hummed lazily overhead. Landon's eyes lingered on the photo of the boy. A pair of tiny sneakers were tucked neatly by the doorway, a school bag hanging from a nail. Though they hadn't seen him yet, his presence filled the room like an echo. "Sit," Kira's mom said, motioning to the couch. "I'm Mrs. Morgan, by the way. And you are?" "Landon. This is Jonah, my driver," he said, suddenly aware of how out of place his full name sounded here. "Thank you for having us, ma'am. We didn't really have a backup plan." "Life never asks before it spoils plans," she replied, heading toward the kitchen area. "But stomach doesn't know all that. Let me warm the stew." Kira disappeared briefly down a hallway, returned in a dry t-shirt and joggers, then tossed them a couple of clean towels. "You can dry off a bit. Guest bathroom is through there. We don't have your hotel-level things, but we have soap and water that works." Landon took the towel, fingers brushing hers for a moment. Her hand was warm, solid. He murmured, "Thank you," and meant it in a way that felt too big for just a towel. In the bathroom, he stared at his reflection in the small mirror. His usually perfect hair was wild, his suit wrinkled and stained from the storm. For once, he didn't look like the billionaire king of buildings. He looked like a tired man who'd been pulled out of his world and dropped into another. He changed into a plain t-shirt and track pants from an emergency bag Jonah kept in the SUV. grateful for the dry fabric. When he stepped back into the sitting room, the air smelled of tomatoes, spices, and something comforting he couldn't quite name. The dining table was simple wood worn smooth by years of use. 4 mismatched chairs around it. Mrs. Morgan set down a pot of stew, a bowl of rice, another of plantains. Kira placed spoons and cups, moving with easy familiarity. Jonah hovered by the doorway until Kira waved him over. "Sit, Mr. Jonah," she said. "If my mother sees you standing when there is food, she'll scold all of us." Mrs. Morgan clicked her tongue. "Nobody goes to bed hungry in this house if I can help it. Sit down, all of you." They obeyed. Landon took a seat, unsure where to put his hands. He couldn't remember the last time he sat at a table this small with people he'd met less than an hour ago. In his mansions, dinner was served on long tables where people spoke in low voices about deals and trips. Here, the plates were slightly chipped, the tablecloth faded, but the air felt softer. Mrs. Morgan murmured a short prayer of thanks before they ate. Landon bowed his head out of respect, eyes briefly closing. For a second, he imagined his father sitting here and scoffing at the simplicity, then pushing his chair back uncomfortably. The image made him strangely protective of this tiny room. As they started to eat, conversation unfolded in gentle bursts. "So, Mr. Landon," Mrs. Morgan said between bites, "what were you doing on that bad road in this kind of weather? Even our people here avoid it at night." "Business meeting," he answered, spoon hesitating near his mouth. "Land negotiations. I came from Abuja." "Ah, Abuja," she said, eyes twinkling. "Where the money lives." Kira shot her a look. "Mom." "What?" She shrugged. "Everybody knows Abuja has money, and Mo has dust." She turned back to Landon. "Still, money or not, storm is storm. It doesn't respect anybody's bank account." Jonah chuckled under his breath. Landon did too, surprised by how natural it felt. Kira watched him for a moment, then asked, "You always this determined to keep appointments, even if the sky is falling?" "It's how I was raised," he said. "My father built our company from nothing. He believed in showing up no matter what. No excuses." "Sounds lonely," she said quietly. The word slipped under his guard. He glanced up at her. "Lonely?" "Yeah," she replied, lifting one shoulder. "If everything is about deals and showing up, when do you rest? When do you just exist?" He didn't have an answer. His whole life had been a chain of targets. Next building, next project, next contract. Rest was something you bought in the form of spa weekends and private beaches, then rushed through on the way to the next big thing. Before the silence could get heavy, a small door creaked at the back of the house. Tiny footsteps padded down the hallway. A sleepy boy, maybe 6 years old, shuffled into view in superhero pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Mama, Nepa took light?" he mumbled, then stopped when he saw strangers at the table. Kira's face softened in a way Landon hadn't seen before. "Hey, buddy," she said gently. "We have guests." They had car trouble. The boy's gaze landed on Landon's face, then on Jonah, then on the food. "Good evening, sir," he said shyly, voice polite. "Good evening," Landon replied, a strange warmth spreading through him. "You must be the owner of those toy trucks," he added, nodding toward the anchor shelf. The boy's eyes lit up. "Yes, sir. My name is Mason." He stepped closer, leaning against Kira's side. She rested a hand on his head, fingers absent-mindedly smoothing his hair. Landon saw it now, the extra pair of shoes, the kitty cup by the sink, the homework paper on the side table. This small house was not just a shelter. It was a whole world for two, held together by a mother who fixed engines in the rain and a grandmother who refused to let anyone sleep hungry. "Go back to bed, Mason," Mrs. Morgan said with gentle firmness. "You have school tomorrow." We'll save stew for you." "Yes, Grandma," he said, then whispered something into Kira's ear that made her smile. She kissed his forehead and nudged him toward the hallway. Landon watched him go, something aching quietly behind his ribs. In all his properties, he had never built a home that felt like this one, with its cheap tiles, its cluttered shelves, its unpolished warmth. Later, when plates were cleared and the storm outside had softened to a low grumble, Kira showed him and Jonah to a small guest room, 2 single beds, a narrow wardrobe, a curtain that fluttered with the breeze sneaking in around the window frame. The sheet smelled of detergent and sunlight, old but clean. "If it gets too cold, there's an extra blanket in the wardrobe," she said. "We wake early around here. I'll start on your SUV as soon as there's light." Landon nodded. "Kira, thank you for all of this." She shrugged, hand on the doorway. "You were in trouble. I could help. That's all. Good night, Landon." "Good night." When she left, closing the door softly behind her, the room felt even smaller, but oddly safe. Jonah lay down almost immediately, exhaustion dragging him under. Landon stretched out on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. Through the wall, he heard faint voices, Mrs. Morgan humming, Mason asking one last question, Kira laughing quietly. Household sounds no luxury apartment insulation would ever allow. His mind drifted back to the highway, the dead engine, the moment her truck had appeared through the rain like a stubborn star. He thought of her hands, sure and capable, her eyes unafraid even when talking to a man like him. He thought of the way her mother prayed over the food and the way her son leaned into her like she was the safest place in the world. In the darkness, with no city lights bleeding in, the truth slid over him with uncomfortable clarity. His towers, his offices, his parties, they were full, but he was empty. This tiny house in Mo, with its chipped plates and crowded shelves, had more real warmth than all his penthouses combined. He turned on his side, listening to the rain. Somewhere beyond this town, the land deal waited, numbers and signatures and promises of profit. But for the first time since he could remember, his last thought before sleep was not about money or land. It was about a poor, female mechanic in a gray jumpsuit who had dragged him out of danger, fed him at her small table, and opened a door he hadn't known was closed inside him. Morning crept into the house in Mo with the soft gray light of a sky still recovering from a storm. For a few seconds, Landon didn't know where he was. He heard a distant clanking rhythm, metal on metal, the whir of something electric, a low hum of effort. This wasn't the quiet, sealed-off stillness of his penthouse bedroom in Abuja. The air smelled faintly of oil and soap, not expensive cologne and polished marble. He blinked, his eyes open. The ceiling above him was cracked in one corner, the paint a little faded. Jonah was still asleep on the other bed, one arm flung over his face, breathing deep. The thin curtains glowed with early light, and beneath the windowsill, the sound of tools grew clearer. Kira. He sat up slowly, the cheap mattress springs creaking under his weight. For a moment he just sat there, listening to the clank-clank of a spanner against metal, the thud of footsteps outside, the faint murmur of a woman's voice that had already become familiar after just one night. It struck him that she had promised to start early, and she had. No reminders, no follow-up calls. She just showed up for the work. He dressed quickly, pulling on his t-shirt from last night and a clean pair of jeans from the emergency bag. When he slid the door open, the cool morning air brushed his face. The house was quieter inside now. A pot simmered on the stove in the small kitchen, and a note sat on the dining table with his name written in neat handwriting. "Good morning, Mr. Landon. There's tea and bread. Your driver can eat when he wakes up. I'm in the workshop with your SUV. Kira." He stood over the note longer than necessary, tracing the calm certainty in her words. No fuss. No flourish. Just, I'm in the workshop with your SUV. Doing exactly what she said she would do. when he was still asleep. Outside, the yard glistened with leftover puddles. The storm had washed everything clean. Even the air felt scrubbed. Behind the house, the workshop door stood half open. As he approached, the sounds grew louder: ratchet clicks, the whir of a power tool, the scrape of a creeper sliding across the floor. He paused at the threshold. The luxury SUV that had defined his panic last night now sat jacked up slightly, its hood open like a patient on an operating table. Kira moved around it with practiced ease, her gray jumpsuit back on, sleeves rolled up, braids tied up high out of her face. A smear of black grease streaked across one cheek, but it didn't dim the sharp alertness of her eyes or the steady concentration in her expression. She didn't notice him at first. She was too busy working. He watched as she reached into the engine bay, hands confident and sure. Her fingers traced wires, checked bolts, adjusted connections. She paused, listened to the subtle creak of a fan blade as she spun it by hand, then nodded to herself. She walked to a workbench where an old radio played low music beside neatly arranged tools and a disassembled fan assembly that looked suspiciously like something that had once belonged inside his SUV. "You're replacing the fan already?" he asked, stepping into the workshop. She glanced over her shoulder, not startled, just acknowledging him. "Good morning, billionaire in distress," she said dryly. "Yeah." The old one had been struggling for a while. Too much strain, not enough maintenance. Last night just finished what was already breaking. He moved closer, stopping a few feet away from the car. "Are you sure it'll be safe to drive back today?" "If I wasn't sure, I wouldn't let you drive it at all," she said simply. "I don't send people onto that road with half-fixed cars. It's my name on the work, and my conscience." The way she said my name made him look around. On the wall, painted in bright but slightly chipped red letters, were the words Morgan, Auto, and Mechanical. Underneath, in smaller letters, "We fix it right, or we don't fix it." He smiled a little. "Catchy. Thanks," she said, tightening a bolt. "My dad came up with it. I kept it." There was something in the way she said, "kept it," that hinted at a story he suddenly wanted to hear. Instead, he asked, "Did you sleep at all?" "Some," she answered. "Storm woke me a few times." She paused, then added, "Besides, your radiator fan wasn't going to replace itself, and your meeting won't wait forever." The fact that she remembered his meeting and respected it tugged at him. He wasn't just another broken car to her. She saw the whole picture. The man, the responsibility, the life that waited beyond her little town. "What exactly went wrong?" he asked, nodding at the open hood. She stepped back, wiped her hands on a clean rag, and pointed. "Your cooling fan motor was already weak. Probably been making small noises for months that nobody listened to. With the storm, the road, the extra strain, the fan couldn't spin as fast as it needed to. The radiator overheated, engine got too hot, coolant boiled, and the system basically panicked." He listened, surprisingly captured by the way she explained it. She talked about the engine like a person who had been ignored, pushed too hard, not given the care it needed. "If you'd kept forcing it," she continued, "you could have cracked your head gasket, warped your engine block. Big, expensive damage. Last night, the breakdown was actually your car saving itself." He raised an eyebrow. "Saving itself by stranding me in the middle of nowhere?" She gave a small smile. "Sometimes life has to stop you hard to keep you from destroying everything. Machines, people, not so different." The words hit deeper than he expected. How many times had he ignored warning signs in his own life? Stress, fatigue, the way his chest tightened before big presentations because he thought he was too important to stop. How many times had he just kept accelerating because his father's voice in his head said kings didn't rest? "And now?" he asked, clearing his throat. Is it okay? Now it's better than okay, she replied. New motor, clean connections. Flushed your coolant. Checked your belts. I did more than the bare minimum, because I don't like seeing cars come back on tow trucks for the same problem. He realized she'd gone the extra mile without being asked, without knowing if he'd ever give her more business. She just had a standard, a way she did things. She moved to the driver's side and turned the key. The engine roared to life, then settled into a smooth, steady purr. The temperature gauge climbed a bit, then stabilized at a safe level. The new fan whirred quietly, almost eagerly. Satisfied, she shut it off and wiped her hands again. You're good to go. He reached into his pocket. This part was familiar. This was the moment he took control again. The moment he turned everything back into a transaction. He pulled out his wallet and counted out a thick bundle of notes, way more than any reasonable mechanic bill for a fan replacement and tow. He added more, because he remembered the food, the dry room, the fact that she'd started before sunrise. This should cover the towing, the parts, and your labor, he said, extending the money. And then some. She looked at the bundle without moving to take it. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd misjudged the amount and insulted her. Then she shook her head. Too much, she said. You don't even know how much it is, he replied, almost laughing. I don't have to, she said. I charge fairly. And I already wrote the bill. She walked over to the workbench and grabbed a handwritten slip, bringing it back. Her prices were precise, broken down line by line. Tow fee, parts, labor, nothing hidden. He glanced from the modest total to the money in his hand. Keep the rest as gratitude. You could have left us on the road last night. She hesitated, then gave a small, almost reluctant nod. Fine. I'll take some extra for the trouble. She plucked a portion from the stack, then closed his hand over the rest and pushed it gently back toward him. Keep the rest for fuel, she said. That road eats gas. And you still have to come back safe. He stared at her, thrown off balance by her refusal to drain him just because he could afford it. He was used to people trying to get as much as possible from him at every turn, vendors, partners, even supposed friends. Kira calculated what was fair, took it, and walked away from what she could have taken. Kira, he said softly, you know I'm a billionaire. I know, she finished for him, lips quirking, but that doesn't mean your money is a toy. If I start charging people based on how rich they look, I'll stop seeing clearly, and I need clear eyes to work. There it was again. That invisible internal rule book she lived by, unwritten but solid as steel. The poor female mechanic who had helped him in distress was richer in some ways than half the board members he'd ever met. Mrs. Morgan appeared at the workshop door, Mason peeking out from behind her leg with his school bag on. You're leaving, my son? She asked. In a few minutes, ma'am, he said. Thank you for last night. I won't forget it. You just drive carefully, and remember you're human, she said. Not machine. Mason waved, grinning. Bye, sir. Bye, big car, he called, pointing at the SUV. Landon found himself laughing. Bye, Mason. A few minutes later, with the SUV humming confidently beneath him, he pulled out of the yard. Kira stood near the gate, one hand on the bell, metal, watching. As he rolled past, their eyes met through the open window. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that simple connection. Billionaire, mechanic, two people who shouldn't have crossed paths, and yet had. Thank you, Kira, he said again, voice quieter this time. Get to your meeting, she replied, and don't ignore strange sounds from your engine anymore. I won't, he promised, though he knew she wasn't just talking about cars. As he drove away from Mo, the town shrinking in the rearview mirror, The road ahead looked the same as it had the night before, long, rough, unpredictable. But inside, something had shifted. The king of buildings, who only measured value in land, towers, and numbers, now carried the image of a modest house, a warm dinner table, a little boy's sleepy greeting, and a poor female mechanic who refused to overcharge him and told him to use his money for fuel instead. By the time the land deal meeting came into view, with its waiting elders and files and promises of profit, he already knew the truth he didn't want to face. He had left Mo, but Mo and Kira had not left him. The conference room felt too bright. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, pushing harsh white over polished wood, thick files, and carefully arranged bottles of water. Outside, the sky had shaken off the last of the storm, replacing it with a dry, almost arrogant sunlight. It bounced off the tinted windows, turning the highland view into a shine of green hills and scattered rooftops. Landon sat at the head of the table, back in the role everyone knew. The young billionaire, the king of buildings, the man who turned empty land into skylines. His dark suit was fresh, his watch gleamed, his hair was back in place. The only sign of last night's chaos was a faint stiffness in his shoulders and the way his eyes drifted, every so often, to the window instead of the documents. "Mr. Price," his Abuja legal counsel prompted, gently. "If you'll turn to page 17, we can finalize the compensation structure." He blinked, refocusing. Page 17. Columns of numbers, projections, profit. He knew this dance. He'd choreographed it 100 times. Still, the words floated in front of him like they belonged to someone else's life. Across the table, the village chiefs and land representatives sat in their traditional attire, fabrics rich with pattern and meaning. Some were older, faces lined by sun and worry. Others were younger, eyes sharp, measuring him as carefully as they measured the offer in front of them. "We have reviewed your proposal," the eldest chief said, his deep voice vibrating gently across the table. "You offer a fair amount for the land, and you promise jobs when the construction begins. But our people fear promises that vanish when the ink dries." Landon nodded, fingers tapping silently. Normally, he would launch into a polished reassurance slide decks, timelines, past success stories. Today, the words didn't come so easily. He saw the chief's lined face. Then, for no reason he could explain, his mind flashed to Mrs. Morgan's hands setting food on the table, Kira bending over his engine, Mason in superhero pajamas blinking sleepily. "Promises are only as good as the people making them," he heard himself say, his tone slower, more grounded. "I can show you the buildings we've raised in Abuja. I can show you the jobs we've created there. But I know your concern isn't their lives, it's your people's." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "So tell me," he said, surprising even himself, "what does a fair deal look like to you? Not just in money, but in what happens after my company builds here." A murmur fluttered around the table. His own team exchanged quick glances. This wasn't on the prepared script. One of the younger representatives, a woman in a navy wrapper, spoke up. "We don't want our children pushed out," she said. "In other deals we've heard of, investors buy the land, build, and suddenly the original families cannot afford to live near what used to be theirs. We don't want that story repeated here." Landon listened. Really listened. Last night, sitting at a small table in Mo, he'd eaten food from the hands of a woman who could be one of these people's neighbors, whose whole life circulated around a workshop and a modest house. If someone swooped in, bought the land under her feet, and turned it into glass towers without thinking of her, anger rose in him that had nothing to do with business. "What if," he said slowly, thoughts aligning in real time, "we attach a clause guaranteeing a percentage of units at controlled prices for existing residents and their children, and training programs during construction, so local youths can learn skills and actually qualify for the jobs we're promising. His own CFO shifted. Landon, that will affect. I know what it will affect, he said sharply, then softened his tone. Run the numbers. We can still profit without acting like the land is empty of lives. The chiefs exchanged looks. The elder spoke again. Mr. Price, this is the first time we are hearing such an offer without having to drag it out of someone. Why? He could have said it was strategy, PR, long-term stability. All of those were true and he knew how to weaponize them in a pitch. But another image floated up, Kira sliding the extra cash back into his hand and saying, if I start charging people based on how rich they look, I'll stop seeing clearly. I had a reminder last night, he said, surprising himself with his own honesty. That land is never just land. It's where someone's mother cooks, where a child learns to ride a bike, where a mechanic builds a small workshop and refuses to overcharge her customer even when he can afford it. The room quieted. You'll get your profit, he continued. I'll get my buildings, but I don't want to build something here that your grandchildren will hate my name for. On any other day, he would have been counting the cost as he spoke. Today, he found himself counting something else. The weight of his decisions on people like Kira. If Mo ever showed up on a proposal, he knew now he couldn't just see it as an investment grid. He saw her face there, her sons, her mother's. His Abuja counsel cleared his throat, flipping through papers. We can draft the clauses, he said. It will require some adjustments but nothing impossible. Silence stretched for a moment. Then the elder chief nodded slowly. Something like respect softening his gaze. If you sign what you say, he murmured, then we may be able to sign what you bring. As the meeting proceeded, more numbers were thrown around: percentages, square meters, timelines. Landon forced himself to track them, to initial, where he needed to keep the gears of his empire turning. This was his world. Contracts, signatures, deals that would appear tomorrow on business blogs with his photo smiling confidently beside the headline. But beneath the surface, a different rhythm pulsed. He kept thinking of the workshop's sign. Morgan Auto and Mechanical. We fix it right, or we don't fix it. He thought of how she had worked on his SUV like a promise, how she had taken only what was fair, and he wondered, uneasily, whether his own empire would stand if it was judged by the same words. When the last document was reviewed and the final signatures were exchanged, hands were shaken all around the table. Perfume, cologne, and the subtle smell of sweat from men who had traveled far filled the room. Someone clapped him on the back. Another brilliant move, Landon, his CFO said. You've secured a jewel. In a few years, we'll have a whole new skyline here. Yeah, he replied, forcing a smile. A whole new skyline. They walked out into the midday sun, the heat pressing down like a physical thing. The convoy of sleek vehicles lined up outside, shining and ready. His driver opened the rear door for him, but Landon hesitated. Over the hills, he could almost imagine a speck of a town called Mo, where a poor female mechanic was probably elbow deep in someone else's engine, charging fairly, feeding her son, living by rules that had nothing to do with quarterly reports. He slid into the car, the leather soft and cool against his back. His phone buzzed with notifications, emails from investors, an article suggestion about his latest project, a few messages from his close friend and business partner asking how the trip was going. He answered none of them. As the convoy pulled away from the meeting venue, leaving the chiefs and their land behind, he rested his head against the seat and closed his eyes. Numbers and projections faded, replaced once more by the memory of a warm, crowded table and a sleepy boy's polite, "Good evening, sir." "You okay, sir?" Jonah asked from the front, stealing a glance through the mirror. "Yeah." Landon said slowly. I'm fine. But even he heard the lie. Because the truth was simple and unsettling. The billionaire had gone on a risky road trip for a huge land deal, and come back with something far more dangerous lodged in his chest. A face, a voice, a pull toward a life that wasn't his, as Abuja's skyline slowly rose into view on the horizon later that day. Glass towers catching the sun like armor. Landon realized he'd crossed an invisible line on that stormy road. He had always known how to chase land, profit, and power. He just didn't know what to do with the way his heart had started chasing a poor female mechanic, who had helped him in distress and then sent him safely on his way, as if she hadn't quietly changed everything.